All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really dark, completely mind-bending true story of a guy from Minas Gerais, Brazil. His name was Pedro Rodrigues Filho, and honestly, his life totally shatters our basic ideas of right and wrong. It's one of the most debated, hyper-violent narratives in modern true crime. I mean, we're talking about a story that literally forces us to stare at that super thin line between justice and just sheer absolute brutality. So, we kind of have to start with this giant, uncomfortable question. Was he a vigilante? Or was he just a serial killer? As we go through his history together, I want you to keep that paradox in the back of your mind. Because, as you'll see, the answer is definitely not as simple as it seems. 70 plus. Just let that sink in for a second. That is the number of victims he explicitly admitted to killing over the course of his lifetime. It's a staggering number. But here is the crazy part. Despite that massive body count, a lot of people back then, and even today, actually hailed him as a hero. No way, right? How does someone with a rap sheet that long get seen as the good guy? Well, to figure out that paradox, we have to go back to exactly where he started. Section 1. A language of violence. You see, his early life was basically an inescapable ladder of trauma. Before he even took his first breath, his mother endured horrific domestic abuse. So he's born into this deeply broken home, totally surrounded by yelling and physical fights. And, when a kid grows up in an environment where literally every problem is solved with a fist, well, that becomes their normal. That becomes their baseline. This whole timeline of trauma culminated tragically when he committed his very first murder at just 14 years old.
Section 2. Hunting the guilty.
Now, his deadly crusade really kicked into overdrive after an unbelievable personal tragedy. His pregnant girlfriend was murdered. But instead of going to the police, he turned that grief into absolute laser-focused fury. He went out and systematically tracked down the local gang members he held responsible. One by one, he just eliminated them, crossed them right off his list. And this is exactly when that vigilante label really started to stick to him. But then we hit this crucial, chilling turning point. During a stint in the prison system, Pedro actually ran into his own father in a quiet prison hallway. Think about that. The man who had brutalized his mother, the guy who introduced violence into his life before he was even born, is standing right there. That confrontation ended in total silence, and Pedro's own father became just another tally on his growing list of victims. At this point, the violence was completely uncontainable. Actually, scratch that. It was so bad that he committed another murder while locked in the back of a moving police van before he even made it to his cell. Just picture the absolute chaos of that scene. Sirens blaring, driving through the pitch-black night, and right there in the back of a confined van with other detainees, Pedro struck again. The cops opened the doors and were met with an absolute nightmare. Section 3. The prison battlefield. For most people, going to prison is the end of the line, right? But for Pedro, it was basically a brand new playground. 47 plus. That's how many lives he took while supposedly under maximum state supervision. The massive cell blocks and crowded yards of the Brazilian penal system didn't suppress his violent tendencies at all. If anything, they completely amplified them. Now, Pedro claimed he was, purifying the prison, taking out the worst of the worst, murderers, abusers, that kind of thing. And that whole narrative is what fueled his public myth as this dark anti-hero. But the reality was way more arbitrary. For example, evidence shows he notoriously killed a fellow inmate just because the guy was snoring too loudly. Yeah, for snoring. That right there shows a completely unpredictable, uncontrollable rage. That is a far cry from any noble idea of vigilante justice. Because of the sheer volume of his crimes, both inside and out, the courts kept tacking on time. Eventually, they handed down a mind-blowing sentence of over 400 years. 400. But here's the catch. Thanks to Brazilian law at the time capping continuous imprisonment, he could legally only be held for a maximum of 30 years. A 400-year sentence boiled down to a maximum of just 30 years served. Section 4. A bizarre second act. So, in 2007, those 30 years were up, the prison gates swung open, and he actually walked free. And this older Pedro returning to society, he made a total pivot. Instead of fading into the shadows and living a quiet life, he stepped right into the modern spotlight, right in front of a microphone. He adapted to the digital age in a way literally no one could have predicted. He launched a YouTube studio. He started putting out regular videos, talking about his life, his crimes, even giving people advice. And man, he became an insanely polarized figure online. His comment sections were absolute war zones. Some followers praised him, seeing him as this fascinating survivor with unique street wisdom. But critics were completely horrified. I mean, how does a guy with over 70 victims get a platform at all? It forced the whole internet into this massive debate. Are we watching a reformed elder or an unrepentant killer?
Section 5. The final verdict.
But as we bring things up to the present day, it turns out you really can't outrun a history with that much bloodshed. In March 2023, the cycle finally closed. On a totally normal day, in a quiet neighborhood right outside his house, distant gunshots rang out. The man who had spent his absolute entire life dealing out violent ends ultimately met one himself. And that leaves us looking at these trembling scales, questioning everything. Was his lifelong crusade ever truly about justice? Or was it just a pure obsessive need for revenge? Honestly, neither side clearly wins here. We're not here to tell you what to think, just to lay out the facts impartially. Was he righting the wrongs of a broken system, or just feeding a dark compulsion born from a horrific childhood? It's wild to think about why we, as a society, are so fascinated by those blurred lines. So, I'm going to leave you with this final, haunting thought. Violence rarely ends with one victim. It often creates another. When we look back at where his trauma started and the endless ripple effect of his choices, maybe his biggest legacy isn't that staggering body count. Maybe it's the massive warning his life leaves for the rest of us. Because if violence is literally the only language a person ever learns, how can we possibly expect them to speak anything else? I hope this explainer helped unpack this wild story, but it definitely makes you wonder, are there other heroes in our history books hiding truths that are just as dark? Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next.